Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah, welcome to the deep dive.
So today's deep dive, we're going to be we're diving into the massive growth system.pdf, which you've sent over to us.
That's right.
And this is a system of training, and it's claimed to be based on the training secrets of African bodybuilders.
Yes, yes. It purports to be a science-based approach to building muscle, but with this added, intriguing element of drawing inspiration from, these African bodybuilders and kind of like almost like a lost knowledge kind of thing.
Yeah, and they claim it's a science-based approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see how that plays out. And of course, for our listener who's shared this with us,
Yeah.
we want to make sure that you're getting the most out of this deep dive. So we're gonna try to do this in a way that gets to the core insights quickly, gives you those aha moments, and doesn't overwhelm you with too much information or detail.
Right.
So, let's just jump right into it.
Yeah.
The manual starts off with a quote from Mozart, which is it's kind of interesting.
Yeah. What is required is that you should devote your whole life and a great deal of thought to it.
Exactly. So right away, they're drawing this parallel to bodybuilding, suggesting that building muscle isn't just about hitting the gym and lifting weights. It's about a real commitment to understanding the craft, just like mastering a musical instrument.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we do here on the show.
Exactly. Yeah.
We take deep dives into all this stuff so that you don't have to, So yeah, right off the bat, they're kind of framing it as a serious pursuit that demands focus and learning.
Absolutely. And then, I mean, almost immediately after that, there's this really strong warning about copyright, saying, do not photocopy this manual.
Yeah.
They really emphasize that this system is something unique. It's proprietary.
Yeah, very, very unique.
It kind of makes you wonder, like, they really seem to believe in the distinctiveness of what they're offering here.
Yeah, and the effectiveness. They really believe in it.
Exactly.
So there's this interesting opportunity that they offer you in the beginning. You can actually email Rob at weightgainsecrets.com
Okay.
to have what they call a kick-ass personal training session.
Right.
But the catch is you have to read the entire manual first.
Okay, so there's a prerequisite here.
Yeah, and I think it's because they talk about the fact that he's expecting a lot of emails. So I'm assuming it's just so that he doesn't have to answer a bunch of questions that are already covered in the manual,
Yeah. It seems like they're really, really big on efficiency.
Yeah.
And, by having that requirement that you read the whole manual first, they're really, trying to make sure that you've got a solid understanding of the system before offering any personalized advice.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense.
And then there's even the specific technical requirements for the emails too, like no attachments, keep the file size small, and make sure to put your invoice number in the subject line.
Yeah. I'm guessing he just expects a huge volume of emails and wants to keep everything as streamlined as possible.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now here's where it gets, I think, kind of interesting right off the bat. They tackle this saying that's really popular in bodybuilding, which is everything works, but nothing works for long.
Yeah, I've definitely heard that before.
Yeah, and they just call it hogwash.
Okay.
They basically say that muscle magazines push this idea to keep people in a state of confusion.
Okay.
Because if you're confused, you're more likely to buy whatever new thing they're selling.
Yeah, I see. So it's kind of like a marketing tactic to fuel supplement sales.
Yeah, exactly. They even say the more confused you are, the more supplements you'll buy.
Okay, that's interesting. So I guess the main point here is that they're positioning themselves as the solution to that confusion.
Right.
They're saying, consistent progress is achievable, but you need the right approach.
Yeah, and they're basically saying their system is the right approach, obviously.
Yeah, right.
They go on to say that continuous and steady progress is absolutely possible, but you need the correct system.
Okay. So it's kind of a direct challenge to that kind of widespread idea that things just stop working after a while.
Yeah.
And if we connect that to the bigger picture here,
Yeah.
they're essentially saying, forget about this endless cycle of trying new things that stop working. We've got the system that actually delivers, lasting result.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's really appealing to a lot of people, right? Because I think a lot of people have that experience with bodybuilding and muscle building where it's like on again, off again, it's frustrating, and they're kind of looking for that silver bullet, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Now here's another interesting thing that they kind of bring up is that they say necessity can actually drive innovation. And they bring up the example of African bodybuilding in the early 1990s.
Okay, so this is where they start getting into this idea of drawing from African bodybuilders.
Yeah, and they basically say that back then they had really limited access to drugs, to supplements, to expensive gyms, and so on.
Right.
Um, so this actually forced them to develop really effective natural training methods. So it's kind of this perspective shift, right?
Yeah.
Where you normally think, okay, you need all the the technology, the resources, whatever, to make progress in a field.
Yeah.
But they're saying, no, actually, sometimes limitations can make you more creative.
I see. So it's kind of like that idea that necessity is the mother of invention.
Right, exactly, exactly. So for you, the listener, it kind of raises the question: could limitations actually lead to more innovative solutions in your own fitness journey?
That's an intriguing question. It makes you wonder if sometimes those limitations can actually be a good thing.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. They say, they go on to kind of build on this and say that African bodybuilders, pound for pound, had the best physiques in the world.
Really?
Yeah, and that's because they didn't have all those shortcuts.
Okay. So they're really attributing a lot of success to this kind of natural approach that was born out of necessity.
Yeah, yeah, and it really sets up the entire massive growth system. It's like the backstory for why their system is supposedly so effective.
Right. It's a very specific origin story that kind of adds this mystique to it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Finally, they make a bold promise. They say that their system is a fail-proof 18-week program, and it's guaranteed to make you grow muscle. However, they immediately follow that up with a pretty stark warning.
Okay.
They say it's going to be gruesome,
Gruesome. Okay.
and it's going to demand a lot of commitment.
All right. So no pain, no gain, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, basically.
Yeah.
So for you, you're going to get results, but it's not going to be easy. It's going to require real work and dedication.
Right. Right. They're setting the bar pretty high in terms of the effort required.
Yeah.
So it seems like they're really trying to attract, people who are serious about getting those results.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's get into the science behind muscle growth.
Okay.
So they talk about adaptation and recovery, and they introduce this concept of the general adaptation syndrome, or GAS.
GAS. Okay.
Yeah, and they even have some charts to kind of illustrate this. Basically, they're saying that muscle growth isn't linear.
Right. Right.
You need to, push your body, allow it to recover, adapt, and then you increase the challenge again. If you ignore that cycle, you're just going to stay stuck.
Right. So it's not just about, lifting weights every day and hoping for the best. There's a process here. There's a cycle.
Exactly, exactly. So can you kind of walk us through how this GAS model applies to the massive growth system?
Sure. So the GAS, the general adaptation syndrome, it basically describes how your body responds to any kind of stress. And in this case, the stressor is, the intense workouts that they're recommending.
Right.
So it starts with homeostasis, this state of balance, point A on their chart.
Yeah.
And then when you introduce a new stressor, like a really tough workout, your body enters the shock and alarm stage. That's A to B on the chart.
Okay.
And after that initial shock, your body tries to cope.
Yeah.
It enters this adaptation and counter shock phase.
So trying to adapt to that new stress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's point C. And then if the stress continues, your body actually does adapt.
And it gets stronger.
It gets stronger, becomes more resilient, and that's point D on the chart.
Okay.
But if the stress is too much or it goes on for too long without enough recovery, that's when you get into the fatigue stage.
And that's point E. And this is where things can start to go wrong.
Right.
You can get injured, you can burn out, you just don't make progress.
Yeah.
Now, what they really emphasize is that is the lag time,
I like.
the active rest period.
Okay.
And that's point F on the chart.
Okay.
And this is where the actual muscle growth happens.
So all that stuff that you're doing in the gym, that's not actually when you're getting bigger.
No, that's just the stimulus.
Right.
The actual growth happens during this recovery period.
Oh, I see.
So for you, the listener, it's really important to understand that that you're not going to see those gains immediately after your workouts. It's in the days after, when your body is repairing and rebuilding that the real magic happens.
So you're basically saying that the real work happens when you're not working out.
In a sense, yeah.
They also talk about superimposing adaptation, A1.
A1, okay.
What does that mean in the context of this system? Right. So superimposing adaptation, that refers to the idea that each training cycle, each week or each few weeks of training, it builds upon the adaptations that you achieved in the previous cycle.
Okay.
So as you get bigger, as you get stronger, it's going to take more and more stress, more and more intensity to keep forcing your body to adapt and grow.
So you can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again.
Right, exactly. You can't just, use the same weight, the same reps, the same exercises forever and expect to keep making progress. You got to constantly challenge your body in new ways.
So you're always kind of raising the bar.
Exactly, yeah.
How do they structure a typical week of training to kind of take all this adaptation into account?
Right. So the typical weekly cycle, it's designed to, obviously apply that stress, allow for the adaptation, but also prevent you from overtraining.
Right. Yeah.
So week 1 is kind of like the alarm phase. That's where your body experiences this new, unaccustomed stress.
Oh.
You're hitting it with these challenging workouts.
Yeah.
Weeks 2 and 3, that's kind of the adaptation phase where you're really, under high stress, intense workouts, really pushing your body.
Okay.
And then comes week 4. This is the crucial one.
Okay.
Week 4 is all about recovery.
Okay.
So you have this active rest period followed by 2 full days of complete rest.
So a whole week of kind of taking it easy.
Not the whole week. It's an active rest period, which we'll get into later what that means exactly.
Okay.
But then 2 days of complete rest. And that's really designed to prevent your body from reaching that fatigue stage, the point E on the chart.
Right.
And it allows for what they call the uploading effect, which is basically where the real benefits of that intense training are realized.
Okay. So you're pushing, and then you take a step back, and that's when your body kind of catches up.
Exactly. And during that step back, that's when, you really start to see the muscle growth, the strength gains, all that good stuff.
So it's all about finding that balance, right, between pushing yourself and allowing your body to recover and rebuild.
Precisely. And that's really the key to long-term progress, according to this manual.
Yeah.
They really emphasize that, manipulating your training volume and intensity in a consistent and strategic way, that's what's going to lead to real growth.
Okay.
And that also means giving your CNS, your central nervous system, your tendons, your muscle tissue, all that stuff, giving it the time it needs to recover and adapt the increasing demands that you're placing on it.
So what are the 2 main stages for muscle growth that they really emphasize in the manual?
So the 2 key stages, the first one is what they call unaccustomed stress, which is basically achieved through progressive resistance.
Okay.
So that's just, consistently lifting heavier weights over time.
Good.
But doing it with proper form, not just throwing weight around.
Right.
And then the second stage is continuing to increase that stress over time.
Great.
So it's not enough to just lift heavy weights for a few weeks and then stay at that level. You got to keep pushing. You got to keep adding weight. You got to keep challenging yourself to force your body to adapt.
So it's that progressive overload, that continuous push to get stronger.
Exactly, yeah.
You mentioned the active rest period a few times.
Right.
What does that actually involve, and why is it so important according to the manual?
So the active rest period, it's followed by those 2 to 3 full days off from training.
Right.
But it's not just, sitting on the couch and doing nothing.
Okay.
There's a specific way that they want you to approach this.
Okay.
And it's absolutely crucial, they say, for allowing your muscles to adapt and for potential gains of up to 5 pounds to occur.
Wow. Okay. So you're saying I could potentially gain 5 pounds of muscle just by taking some time off?
Well, not just taking time off. It's active rest. And there's a very important condition here.
Yeah.
During this rest period, you got to maintain a calorie intake that's at least 1,000 calories above your your BMR, which
Okay.
is your basal metabolic rate, basically how many calories your body burns at rest.
Right. Right.
So you're still eating a surplus of calories even though you're not training as hard.
Okay. So you're still feeding the muscle growth.
Exactly. And they even suggest complete relaxation during this time, maybe even taking like a mini vacation. And they specifically say no sports, no high energy activities.
Okay. So really take it easy.
Yeah, they really want you to let your body recover and focus on rebuilding that muscle tissue.
So the rest is just as important as the work.
Absolutely. You know, in a way, the rest is when the real work happens.
Right. They say by doing this, you allow the uploading effect to take place, which is when real growth occurs.
Yeah, that's their term for it.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about intensity
Okay.
and repetition ranges. So they define intensity as the amount of work you do in a certain amount of time.
Okay.
And they go on to kind of distinguish it from just being tired. They'll
Yeah.
like, it's not just about feeling fatigued. It's about the actual effort that you're putting in.
Right. So it's not just about how hard you feel like you're working. It's about the actual, physiological stress that you're putting on your muscles.
Yeah. And then they lay out these different repetition ranges for different goals.
Okay.
So if your goal is strength, pure strength gains,
Yeah.
they recommend a low rep range, 1 to 7 reps,
Okay.
using 80 to 90% of your maximum ability for 1 rep.
Okay.
For building muscle mass, that hypertrophy, they say the sweet spot is 8 to 12 reps,
Yeah.
using 70 to 80% of your max.
Okay.
And then for endurance and quality, they say you should go higher, 15 to 30 reps at 45 to 65% of your max.
Got it. So it's really about, tailoring your rep range to your specific goal.
Yeah, yeah. They talk about these 2 types of intensity
Okay.
that you can kind of play with. Metabolic intensity, and then they don't really give it a name, but it's basically how fast you do your reps.
Okay.
So let's start with metabolic intensity. What's the idea behind that one?
So metabolic intensity, it basically means that you're challenging your muscles' energy systems.
Okay.
You're making them work harder to produce energy, to handle things like lactic acid buildup.
Okay.
And that can actually lead to some pretty significant adaptations, like building more mitochondria,
Okay.
which are like the powerhouses of your cells.
Right, right.
They say that metabolic intensity can be achieved through either longer workouts with more exercises
Okay.
or shorter, more frequent workouts.
Okay.
And interestingly, they seem to prefer the shorter, more frequent workouts.
Okay.
They suggest that those can actually help optimize your testosterone levels.
Interesting.
So if you're looking to, really boost your metabolism and build that lean muscle mass, they would recommend maybe doing, multiple shorter sessions throughout the day rather than one long, grueling workout.
Okay.
So it's kind of a different approach than what you might typically hear in the bodybuilding world.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Now let's talk about the rep speed.
Okay.
So, how fast or slow you do your reps.
Right.
They describe these 3 types. Explosive reps,
Okay.
continuous reps, and rhythmic reps.
All right.
What are the key differences there?
So explosive reps, despite the name, they're actually supposed to be slow and controlled, especially on the eccentric portion of the lift,
Okay.
which is the lowering phase.
Okay.
And that's to eliminate momentum.
Okay.
So you're lifting the weight as explosively as possible, but then you're lowering it under control.
Okay.
And that allows you to really maximize the weight that you're using,
Yeah, yeah.
which is great for stimulating those fast twitch muscle fibers, the
Right,
ones that
yeah.
have the most potential for growth. Continuous reps are done at a much slower pace.
Okay.
No bouncing, no jerking, and no rest at the top or bottom of the movement.
Okay.
So you're keeping constant tension on the muscle,
Okay.
and that can be really challenging.
Yeah, yeah.
And then rhythmic reps are somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
There's a slight explosion on the lifting phase.
Yeah.
But it's not quite as controlled as the continuous reps.
Okay. So it's kind of like a blend of the 2.
Exactly. Yeah.
How do these different repetition ranges and speeds actually affect the muscle cells themselves?
Right. So the manual goes into a bit of detail about the cellular adaptations that occur.
Okay.
So high rep training, like in the
Yeah.
15 to 20 rep range.
Yeah.
That primarily affects the mitochondria,
Okay.
which are like the energy factories inside your muscle cells.
Okay. So it's making your muscles more efficient at producing energy.
Exactly, yeah. And that can be really important for endurance, for recovery, all that good stuff.
Okay.
Medium reps, they're considered the primary drivers of muscle growth. They lead to an increase in the size and the density of the myofibrils, which are the actual. So that's where you're actually getting bigger.
Right.
Now, interestingly, they also mention that doing partial reps combined with high reps,
Okay.
that can actually help to strengthen your connective tissues, your ligaments, your tendons,
Okay.
and it can even directly stimulate your central nervous system, which can indirectly help you get stronger and build more muscle overall.
So it's
So,
not just about the muscle fibers themselves, it's also about strengthening the things around them.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about building a solid foundation, so to speak. And that's something that a lot of people overlook. They just focus on making the muscle fibers bigger, but they don't think about, the tendons, the ligaments, the CNS, all that stuff.
Right. And that's got to be able to handle that new size and strength, right?
Exactly. Yeah. If you're building a house, you got to make sure the foundation is strong.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the whole thing's going to collapse.
Yeah. Makes sense. And finally, on the topic of rep speed, they make a direct connection to different types of muscle fibers.
Right.
So can you break that down for us?
Sure. So explosive training.
Yeah.
That's said to primarily target the fast twitch fibers.
Okay.
Slow continuous tension.
Yeah.
That primarily works the type 1 or slow twitch fibers, which are known for their endurance.
Right. Right.
Medium range repetitions performed explosively.
Okay.
Those stimulate the type 2 fast twitch fibers.
Okay.
And then low reps, heavyweight, explosive. Those target the type 2B fast twitch fibers, which have the greatest potential for hypertrophy, for muscle growth.
Okay.
So, by understanding this, you can really tailor your rep speed to target the specific types of muscle fibers that you want to develop.
So if you're trying to get big and strong,
Yeah,
it sounds like you want to be focusing on those explosive low rep sets.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Let's dive into recovery strategies,
All right.
which the manual sees as a really vital part of the system.
Yeah.
They say recovery is when your body actually repairs and builds muscle.
Right.
But there's a limit to how quickly that can happen.
Right. You can't just, train as hard as you possibly can every single day and expect to recover from that.
Yeah, yeah.
And they emphasize, keeping your workouts short, intense, and infrequent to allow for maximum recovery in the shortest amount of time.
Okay.
They even bring back this idea of the survival mechanism, suggesting that your body will only recover as fast as it thinks it needs to based on how intense and how demanding your training is.
So if you're really pushing yourself,
Yeah,
your body's going to adapt to that and recover more quickly.
exactly. It's like your body is saying, okay, this is a serious threat. I need to be ready for it.
Yeah.
And it's going to prioritize recovery to make sure you survive.
Right. So it's really interesting how they tie it back to that primal instinct.
Yeah.
They mentioned a study that suggests that muscle atrophy or muscle loss can actually start after about 72 hours of not using a muscle.
Oh, wow.
So what's the takeaway there?
So the implication is that to prevent muscle loss, you should be aiming to train each major muscle group at least twice a week.
Okay.
That's going to give your body that signal that it needs to maintain that muscle mass.
Right, right. So it's use it or lose it, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
What about overtraining? A lot of people worry about that.
Right.
How does the manual address that?
So they're pretty clear about this.
Okay.
They say overtraining mainly happens when you're not getting enough rest and you're not eating enough calories.
Okay, so it's not just about training too much, it's about not recovering enough.
Exactly. It's the imbalance between the stress that you're applying and the recovery that you're allowing.
Right.
They actually recommend taking a full week completely off from intense training.
Wow.
They call it overtraining generating routines.